In all seriousness, it was a small inspiration for this episode where it's where do we allow our country that is so big, that's so divided, to find just a place where we can move on. Everything to me is acceptable at this point. It just is. Everyone can be who they want to be. We all just need to get over it. If you're against it, it is what it is. Just what we got to do.
Sure. I mean, like, I think everybody should be allowed to be who they want to be. And I think that, you know, in terms of everybody should accept at this point that there are going to be lifestyles, there are going to be identities which may clash with their own. And that does not mean that they are to be vilified. So I think at this stage of the game, you're automatically in the wrong if you're going to invalidate somebody's identity. But yeah, I mean, as of 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you weren't necessarily in the wrong then. However, we as a society have advanced. And so if you are still carrying those kind of views with you into 2021 and onwards, I think maybe you need to do some self-reflection, because this, you know, we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to move forward as a society, I think.
Maybe what the country needs to have is like a solidarity pin where we're all in this together, where if, you know, whether it be a piece of jewelry, something you wear on your shirt, and listen, it's not a rainbow or anything like that. It's literally something where we are all the same and we're into coming together. Something that is worn and everyone wears the same thing at all times. And it's where we're in this together. I know we'll never have solidarity. No, of course not. And it really sucks. But as we're saying that we don't, is of course this fucking dog.
Now, see, that was a nice emphatic fuck.
I know.
That one worked.
Like it's a loud ass fucking bark. Ruh, hear me podcast. Ruh.
Hey, you know, on a fun aside here, did you know ESPN is the actual network that was one of the first to use the F word on cable television? Yeah, they had that movie.
Really?
Brian Dennehy, when he was playing Bob Knight, he went through the whole Carlin skit. Where he's like, fuck's the most versatile word in the English language. And he went on the whole thing. I remember watching it on TV and being like, whoa. Yeah, I was like 11. Ooh, boy, that was wild. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, I feel you. So it's funny. I completely lost my train of thought because the dog started barking. But you know what? It was good because she didn't really bark the entire time, which is good. Yeah, it just sucks that we'll never be like a country that comes together. That's really what it all comes down to, because even if we get closer, I feel like if we want to come together, there needs to be forgiveness. Let's just try to forgive a little bit more than to write people off. And am I wrong where we should just kind of forgive each other for anything that is not physical harm, I guess, or like an actual hate crime of some sort? There are people who say some very homophobic things that are like ridiculously bad. That's okay. You really never should have said that. And that really defines you as a person. There's worse things that have been said that are like hate crime-ish. I mean, this was not hate crime-ish. He's basically being punished like he committed a hate crime. Lost his job. Again, he resigned. Let's call it for what it is. He lost his job. He got fired and probably got money on the side so that the whole email chain couldn't have come out. At what point forgive like a certain part of history and let's just move on from it? Why do we care so much about Christopher Columbus Day? Like just a day off. That's all it was. And then someone was like, let's make this a fucking problem.
You know, I always do remember thinking it was odd when I discovered, like, you know, as a kid, I want to say I was like maybe 13 or 14. We had a history teacher in Kingston High School who really kind of tuned us into the whole, the shittiness of Columbus and talked about how, you know, funny enough, it was one of the first times I ever heard a teacher curse because he was like, oh, yeah, you know, Columbus, when you really look at it, he was kind of a bastard. And I remember thinking, wow, really? And then I looked into it. He did use the word bastard.
He used the word bastard?
And it hit that time. I was like,
nice.
Ooh, like it got me interested. And then I looked, and sure enough, like Columbus really was a bastard. He was raping everybody and just pillaging. And I was like, holy shit, this guy's a real asshole. And then I always thought it was kind of odd. I'm like, why do we have a Columbus Day if like there's enough history out there that points to this guy having been a piece of shit? And the argument, the Columbus apologists, if you will, like to make the argument that, he discovered America. And so like him or not as a person, he discovered America, but he didn't really. Like he kind of he accidentally discovered America and then just fucking was a complete and total fucking idiot about it. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I'm absolutely for the push to make it Indigenous Peoples Day. And I think that's important. And that's not to say that the indigenous peoples were just completely, they had wars among each other too. They did shitty things to each other. I'm not saying they were as bad as Columbus and, they were at least free to do what they wanted between each other. And they still, at the end of the day, all had a place to stay. They had their own lands and whatnot. I think there's a deliberate sort of like a vilification going on that is not necessary. Columbus was terrible, yes, and what he did was terrible, and so I'm absolutely for Indigenous Peoples Day. But like at the end of the day, people in general, especially back then, were just typically pretty insular, and they were pretty shitty towards anybody outside of their immediate group. So, and it's just, people back then were just wired to be more tribal. But suffice it to say that, yeah, I think just as people have grown a lot since then, I think it is capable, every human being themselves individually is capable of growing. And, society only grows as fast as the slowest person grows with it. So that's why it's important, when things like this do come out, as regardless of what the intent of the media might be to try and capitalize on it, I think it's important to always sort of have like a conversation among those you care about and maybe even yourself where you're like, okay, like what do I think? Like, try and do, especially what Americans do best is relate everything back to yourself. Make it about you for a second. Like, okay, are there any kind of archaic or stupid beliefs from my childhood, maybe the, product of the environment I was raised in that I am still kind of unconsciously harboring within myself? And what can I do? What can I do to maybe challenge those? And, I think it's a good idea to grow as a person in that way.
Or the media is making it seem like you can't grow as a person anymore. If you do something wrong, you're just a bad person. I don't think everyone is really bad. Even people who don't like, I'm just going to go with this, even people who don't like white men, okay? They are not bad people. You and I, Tom, are in a very, very tough spot now. I'm only kidding.
I was going to say, okay, where is this headed?
As much as I would love to leave that in, I know
I think you could.
Like, you're short and I'm fat.
Oh, yeah.
We get made fun of all the fucking time.
Sure.
And you know what?
Fuck it.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you really...
Like, what are we going to do? You're short and I'm fat. I get it. I can't go on certain roller coasters. You fucking can't go into bumper cars. Like, it's okay. I don't know.
The things people say, I mean, you really can't take personally the things people say. People say shitty things to each other all the time. It's just like we were talking about before with kids. There are a lot of times people can display the same characteristics of children. I think a lot of times, especially in just various aspects of society, people can be reduced to the state of children and they can exhibit a lot of the same shitty characteristics that a shitty kid would. And, people are always going to find ways to be mean to each other. And the more people are around, the more ways they're going to find to be shitty to each other. So when it comes to just verbal shit, like somebody says something about you being short, whatever, like who gives a shit? What, is somebody calling me short, somebody making fun of my height? Is that actually going to like really affect me? Like, no, at this point, if I am not immune to a short comment, then that's kind of on me. I mean, like, yeah, okay, it's shitty of somebody to say that, but like, what the fuck? I mean, if I haven't realistically heard, I mean, I've heard pretty much every short joke out there. If I And if somebody were to come at me with a new one, I would probably, at this point, I would probably like congratulate him. I'd be like, yo, hey, I've never heard that one. But I mean, if I'm still going to let that bother me after all the years I've dealt with being short, like, okay, I think at that point I would probably say to myself, like, well, I should probably look into like maybe some resiliency.
But Tom, this is where the problem comes with you have thick skin. And you were raised and you grew to be strong to those things. I'm not going to say where because I don't have kids, but people are being raised and people are being taught to be offended.
But I think there's an important
with those things,
though, right? And the distinction is that I've never been denied housing because of my height. I've never been told that my vote doesn't count because of my height. I've never been able to marry, or I've never not been able to marry who I want because of my height. You know what I mean? Like, so there are, as long as there's laws involved, as long as there are legalities involved, as long as these things are part of a systemic problem, then I don't blame people for being pissed off about it.
But see, that's companies that should be held accountable for having rules that were against certain demographics. To me, that's one of those things where, I mean, what it all comes down to? It all comes down to conversations that rich people have who want to control our lives. Maybe that's what this whole email is about. It's a bunch of fucking rich people talking about people who don't have any money. It certainly could be
looked at that way. I mean, John Gruden, I don't know if he's the best example of this, but the kinds of stories that tend to make headlines like this are the ones where it's more optics than what is even said. So with this, for example, it's not hard to imagine a boardroom table full of rich football coaches, all sitting around shooting the shit and just having a private conversation about wealth and everything else. And then, to think that in between that, they're just talking shit about different types of people and everything else and just common people.
That's how this should be looked at. This is a bunch of billionaires and millionaires fucking talking. And that's what we all need to think about. Let's forget about the homophobic and racial slurs. This is what billionaires and millionaires do.
And that's why that's why the average person doesn't necessarily get. I think it's important to make examples of people like this because it again shows the average person like, hey, look, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how, like, if you are a shitty person, you're bringing shitty ideas with you forward into the future. Like, that's not okay. And again, I don't know if this guy's the best example of this. And it doesn't sound like he was necessarily carrying these ideas with him into the future. But 10 years ago, it wasn't much more acceptable.
I would like to see Jeff Bezos' email to all of his board members about how to treat employees. I mean, can we get on that? I would love to see those emails. So I actually think company emails, we for all publicly traded companies, their emails should all be public. They're publicly traded, so emails and communication should be public. Sure. Think about it. If you invest in a stock, right? You're part owner of a company. Is that how it works? So if you're part owner of a company, you should have access to the emails of the company that you own, whether it be one stock or $1 million worth. Because think about it, the person who owns billions of dollars worth of Amazon stock probably is privy to those to the board meetings, right? But just because somebody owns one doesn't mean that they're not privy to what the person that owns
that's true.
More
yeah,
of.
you get the official press release, but then
Isn't that classism? You're treating somebody that is wealthier. But that's in the company. So listen, if you stay private, that's different. But if you're a public, well, I guess the NFL is not a public company. It is a private company. The NFL is not a privately
it's not
traded
publicly
company
traded
or anything like that.
There's no stock ticker or anything like that.
Like,
and I also think, and I know this is not really on topic, but it just annoys me. It also annoys me that so much money in, like, from a state government or anything else goes to the NFL. I mean, the NFL is just as much like a quasi-governmental agency as something like Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae is, where it's private when it wants to be, but also like, we need money. What are you going to do to convince us to come to your town? What are you going to do to convince us to help out your constituents? And it's like, I think that is fundamentally needs to be changed. But that's a rant for another time.
That is a rant for another time. I think we have a episode for next week we can go on about. This can definitely be, I don't want to call it a two-parter, but we can definitely kind of go into that next week. I think publicly traded companies, you know what? People own part of that company. Therefore, the emails should be open to everyone. If we want to really start getting into public and private emails. Now, personal emails to me, like if you have a Gmail or a Yahoo and a Hotmail or whatever, I feel like those should always be private, no matter what you say. I feel like people should still have the right to privacy, but in a work email, that's where John Gruden fucked up.
Yeah.
This was all in a work email. If this were a private email, that is a problem. But because this was a work email, that's just stupid writing.
Well,
everyone that is communicating via text or through some sort of private correspondence, it should stay that way. And I don't think no matter what is in those messages, emails should ever come to light. I think if that ever does happen where private emails are getting hacked into and that, I think everyone just needs to let that go, because that's a fucking can of worms or whatever you want to call it that really changes things.
Yes.
If you get into private life. But this was a work email. I think that's
part of the problem.
And I think
that if it's in a work email, it's indicative, and maybe not realistically necessarily, but it appears, again, optics, it looks like it's indicative of a company culture, right? If something like this is permissible in a work email, if somebody has the audacity to write something like this in a work email, it implies that there is this level of tolerance for this kind of behavior within an organization as a whole. And it makes the whole organization look bad.
Been here for so fucking long that why didn't someone release this soon? You got to also ask yourself, like, the time of it. The timing of it is very fucking weird. I'm conspiracy theorist and all that stuff. And maybe the Raiders just weren't going to go to the Super Bowl
this
again.
Gets him in the news.
Remember, Gruden had a huge, 10 years, $100 million. There's no other coach with that fucking contract. So now he resigns. He loses his contract. He leaves all the money on the table.
Huh.
There's so much to look at this whole thing. And that's why it's just like, I get it's reported on the media outlets. It's just like, let us see all your shit. How many hypocrites are there right now? I mean, you mean to tell me, and I don't care if someone is, their race doesn't matter, their sexual orientation doesn't matter, and their gender doesn't matter. Anybody who's talking shit about this, I really wonder if they're a hypocrite and how many actually are hypocrites. Because just because you're gay doesn't mean that, like, you're a good person.
No, that is very true. That's happening with that whole Jeffree Star guy. I don't want to say guy, that Jeffree Star character. That's something, that's somebody who is a member of a marginalized group, and I don't know enough necessarily to speak on it, but I know that person
just because you're part of a group
said a bunch
doesn't
of racist
make you
shit and has, espoused a bunch of racist beliefs. And anybody of any race, creed, ethnicity, orientation, whatever, anybody is capable of having shitty ideas.
Anybody can hate. Anybody can be a phobic of some kind.
Right.
And I think we're forgetting about that. Anybody can be violent. Anybody can commit a crime. Anybody that can say something that they're not supposed to say. But that's not what sells. And right now, every article being clicked is either about COVID, Trump, or John Gruden. Because nobody will click about Joe Biden because they're not posting.
Wow. Yeah.
Dude, do you realize I'm going to change the subject. Do you realize gas went up
time
like
for me to buy a truck too. I noticed that yesterday. I was looking at the pump. I was like, whoa, hello. So yeah, that's exciting. I look forward to that. But you want to talk about somebody who doesn't deserve to be forgiven.
Yeah, let's talk about now, listeners. We were talking about forgiveness and like how you need to work on it a little bit more. That's the new F word. The new F word is forgiveness. However, Tom has some great examples of who's not to be forgiven besides Jordan Belfort.
Just one example, but I think what she did was so terrible, and so the thing that really makes this stand out to me is that she just the entire way was clearly like demonstrating a sociopathic disregard for anybody else involved. And that's Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos. And so if you're not familiar with Theranos, basically she was supposed to be the next female Steve Jobs. So she had a company that was going to revolutionize basically all medicine as we know it. One of the revolutionary technologies that she had supposedly patented through this company was the ability to test blood, where they could test without having to actually prick the skin and get a blood sample. And it turned out that it was a complete fabrication. And all of the effort that she put into this company was all about just maintaining a facade of, oh yeah, we have this technology. But no, you can't see it. Like, you can't see it yet. Like, it's not ready. It's not ready for me to show the world, but we have it. It works. And it went as far as there was a reporter. They supposedly did the test on the reporter. And then what they did was, oh yeah, well, we also have to take blood samples and everything as a control, to show that our test is just as accurate as the one that takes your blood sample. And then all they did was they ran the blood sample off to a different lab and got that tested. So that the technology didn't work at all, one bit. It was just a complete fraud. Her trial is still ongoing. And so recently it came out, there was a big doctor who was involved. One of the bigwigs at her company was a patient of this doctor and asked him to come on as some sort of supervisor. He basically testified and said, that he did nothing really during his time as a supervisor. He's making $5,000 a month basically to just be an absentee supervisor because on his resume he had experience running a lab, a clinical lab of some sort. So when it comes to somebody like Elizabeth Holmes, who has, even though she was caught red-handed, has never truthfully admitted that what she did was wrong. And I get it. She's in the middle of a trial and all, and this has been drug out now for years. Somebody like her is not worth forgiving. Now, she may be able to grow as a person, and that's whatever. If she is able to grow as a person, and maybe what she has to do to atone is to invent a technology that's going to be as revolutionary as the one that she claimed to have had possession of to begin with. But in the end, she's a con, the same way, someone like Jordan Belfort's a con. Even though from the conferences she gave and stuff like that, she wore the black turtleneck like Steve Jobs. Some people have said, she has a distinct voice. Some people have said she even went out of her way to speak in a lower voice so that she could be, so she could sound more authoritative, which it definitely is, I think, possible if you listen to her talk. I mean, it sounds like she is trying to put on a voice. But the fact of the matter is, somebody like her is defrauding people without exhibiting any ounce of conscience towards what she's doing. So someone like her, maybe not as easily forgivable, if she's forgivable at all.
Wow. It's very informative.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too into the details of it because I don't know how much time we have, but suffice it to say, the disregard for her investors and the amount of money she had tied up in her company, not to mention all the people she had working for her, I think we as a society would be okay to band together and say, all right, look, this is like what you don't do. There are definitely worse people to ostracize than the likes of Elizabeth Holmes.
No, there is a certain point where you can be apologetic for what you do because you just don't like the repercussions of it. It's about finding that piece of, I did something wrong before you get in trouble, or really feeling something that you were wrong, like real remorse. I still think there are people out in this world who have done something wrong, felt something, and they just don't have the remorse yet. But most of these, when it comes to money, that is another thing. The remorse really isn't there until they realize that they really fucked up. And somebody like her, if she turns out to apologize, she probably isn't sorry. It's just because she got caught and there really is no true remorse. But then there is also no real punishment.
That's the thing, right? What constitutes a fitting punishment for something like that? It's hard to say. it's hard to kind of put punitive value on, because first you have to assess just how much damage she did. And sometimes that gets really tricky because on one hand, like, yeah, okay, there's certainly a monetary aspect to it. Lots of people invested in that company and ended up losing everything because it was all sham. But what about people who may have heard about it, who were diabetic, who were like, ooh, boy, yeah, here comes something where I don't have to prick my finger, every couple hours or whatever, to test myself. Like, the world is becoming a better place. No. I think I'm not going to say anything that happened here was worse necessarily than the monetary aspect of it, but I think there are also a lot of factors to consider.
If she ever caused a death or something along those lines where there was death involved because of that, I think the forgiveness is very, very different. And the only party to forgive is the family of the person that passed away. Like,
what about the stress she caused her employees, for example, right? What kind of a toll did that ultimately take on their health? I mean, at that point, you have to draw the line somewhere, and I draw the line with those people who maybe knew it was a sham, but at the end of the day, it's their job. And maybe they're hanging falsely onto some hope. Maybe they know it's impossible. There's no winning at that point if that's your job and you're upper middle management in a company. Like, it's tough to say, who's actually complicit versus who's just trying to do their best in an unwinnable situation. How much stress did that give them? And yeah, ultimately, what are the long-term effects of that? I mean, that's a lot harder to measure. And so that's why I think even if we as a society do come to a general agreement of like what this person's punishment should be, something like that still shouldn't be forgiven because the effects of it are, who knows how long they'll last. And ultimately, at the end of it all, it's a very clear example of what not to do. Like, hey, this is a shitty thing to do. Don't fucking do this. Like, I think it'll always be pretty cut and dry in that regard. What's your take on it, Christopher? How much have you heard about Theranos before I brought it up today?
I actually have heard about that specific situation, and I don't know what is forgivable for something like that, because again, the whole diet, the whole this is a whole nother fucking conversation to have, but the whole diabetes thing is a thing because insulin. That other asshole, what was his name?
Adam Schlick or whatever his name was. Martin Shkreli.
Yeah, Farmer Bro, like with that piece of shit, Martin Shkreli. What he did is almost not forgivable either. And he's the type of schmuck where is no remorse. You just know because of the way he acted afterwards. He did not have remorse. So he's someone that is not meant to be forgiven. He does not deserve forgiveness.
He doesn't.
Now, but me at the same time, I do not have diabetes. I do not have a direct family member who had diabetes. Now, he probably was the cause for death because of the prices that he tried to throw on people. So my question comes down to the people who lost someone. Do you think he had remorse and do you forgive him? Now, I won't sit here and say to myself, I do not forgive him no matter what, because he did not affect my life. I can say he's an asshole and fuck him. But now there are a bunch of people who lost someone because of his prices and they say they forgive him, because I need to forgive him because, they're the ones who actually felt something from it. If they forgive him, then I'm not supposed to have an opinion. I'm not supposed to feel a certain way because the ones who were actually victims forgave him. Now, I doubt he was forgiven, right? So, but if somebody called us up and they listened to all of our podcasts and said, Jordan Belfort actually did do X, Y, and Z for our family, even though he completely ruined us financially, you really can't be mad at him. He did this for all of us. You can't, he did what he needed to do. Now he didn't, just saying, everyone. But if he did, I would do an apology to him for talking shit. And hopefully he would forgive me. But guess what? I don't need to do that apology because he's doing the same shit with his health bullshit.
Yeah, he's just
a piece of shit. At the end of the day. He didn't, and he got dude. the world seemed to have they forgot about him. Why?
Well,
why isn't he brought up again?
I'm not sure. You know, I think people tend to look at him as the guy who's changed teams. I know a lot of people tend to think that he's like this reformed guy. And now it's almost like when somebody does something really shitty and then they renounce their past of having done shitty things, like habitually done shitty things, having made a career out of doing shitty things. It's like if you know a career criminal and their MO was breaking into houses and stealing shit, right? And then they turn around after so many years and renounce their life of crime. And let's say to keep the comparison straight here, that they got to keep everything they stole for some fucking how, right? But they renounce their life of crime. It's almost like you almost kind of want an in with a person like that because you think like, ooh, well, a person like that is going to know how to tell me how to keep my house safe. So somebody like him can't come in and rob me. Once that person renounces their life of crime, it's almost like, ooh, come here and tell us everything that you know about it. And then maybe we can use that to stop people like you in the future. But what Jordan Belfort was smart enough to figure out is that, hey, I don't actually have to, I can go on record as renouncing it, but I don't actually have to fucking renounce it in order to get that kind of status anyway. So, I definitely think he's playing both sides. But yeah, so that's why I think it was forgiven, is because, or not, maybe not even necessarily forgiven, but kind of just brushed aside and is easily forgotten about, because now he looks at the guy who's championing for the everyman so that somebody like a Jordan Belfort can't come in and take advantage of everybody. Meanwhile, he's still doing that. That's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah. But Farmer Bro, dude, you just know he's a piece of shit. He's American Psycho, and I doubt anybody forgave him.
In the kind of interim between when he went to jail and when he was out on bail for a while, he tried to do the same thing. I remember he was on the internet. He was trying to make an internet presence where he was trying to tell people like how to get rich and how he got where he was and things to do. He was trying to go a similar route, because I remember for the website that we had back then, I actually sat in one of his conferences on, I think it was on, it might have been on YouTube. It might have been like a YouTube live type thing or something. I don't remember exactly where it was, but I sat in on one of his things to watch what he had to say. It was a free one, but he just sat for an hour and talked about stocks and talked about Warren Buffett and all these other things. And it totally just rang all the alarms to me as like, oh, this guy's a fucking con artist. But it was very much the type of thing that a Jordan Belfort does, or a Grant Cardone, or a Gary Vaynerchuk. He sits there and just spits a whole bunch of shit at you really fast. Like, you know how fucking rich I am? You want to know how rich? You want to know how I got so rich? Well, listen, first off, you got to be me, okay? And it's not going to work if you're you. So I want you to take you and throw it away. And then second, here's what I did. And here's the extremely specific set of circumstances upon which I capitalized. And so why the fuck aren't you doing this? And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, there's lots of contradictions here that you're going too fast for me to point out. But yeah, it is essentially that kind of thing. But he also did try to do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if, when the dust settles after this whole Theranos thing, I wouldn't be surprised if the likes of Elizabeth Holmes is possibly a fucking contributor on CNBC 10 years from now, after she's done some self-reflection and she's not that person anymore. She'll be on CNBC as some fucking commentator, like, oh, what do you think about this new pharmacy IPO that's coming out? What does Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos have to say about it? And she's going to be like, well, I don't think it's a very good company.
Yeah, I made a big mistake back then. I realized I went through so much therapy and I needed to move on, and I did. And now I help. God, I'd love to see all the self-help email, like all the people who do the self-help bullshit and life coaching, where they're like, how do I get money from the people who really don't have it and long, like, dude, I would love to see like Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone's fucking emails to people like, how can we get more money this year? What do we need? Who do we need to advertise to?
I saw a good video the other day of Grant Cardone. He was hanging out. First off, as a short man, I can make fun of Grant Cardone's height. He's not very tall, and he was hanging out of this fucking Humvee, and he was like too short to hang out of the door of it, and like his arms are too short to like hang over the window. So he's like really struggling. You can tell he's like standing on like the door sill to like try and like put his elbows over the door, like over the window, of this door while he's talking to you. And so the whole thing was delivered with like this strain of like, I'm trying to make my body fit where it doesn't want to fit. Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm talking to you ballers and hustlers. And I got plenty of ballers, working with me and plenty of big time, football players and blah, blah, working with me. And so I'm Grant Cardone. And this is why you got to invest with my type of company. And he just like, oh my God, dude, how do you not make yourself sick? I did.
Now, see, you just made fun of him.
I do.
And do you think that's okay?
I do, first off, because
now, let me ask you this though. You think if he heard it and was genuinely upset and he said, Tom Last, you really hurt my feelings. Would you apologize?
In terms of making fun of him because he's short, while I would think he's a giant Roger Goodell about it, I might say, okay, this short joke was a little shitty. But no, I think ultimately his mindset is predatory enough. I've seen him make fun of other people. I've seen him cut people down for things over which they have no control, or things that are obviously sensitive issues to them. I've just seen him be such an asshole that no, I don't really have any.
So you would just say, I'm just spitting out what you spit out every day.
He's like, I see you do this all the fucking time. How do you like it? I watched an interview between him and Jordan Belfort. And honestly, I didn't want to root for either one of them. I think I brought this up on the podcast once before, but I watched an interview between the two of them where they were both very, Grant Cardone was being an asshole to Jordan Belfort. And Jordan Belfort, in this instance, wasn't actually doing anything provocative to try and get now what he said before they started rolling. Who knows? Grant Cardone was on Jordan Belfort's podcast, and the two of them were having an incredibly hostile exchange, which was mostly the result of Grant Cardone being very standoffish and like giving like one-word answers and just coming off as very hostile. And you got to be a real asshole to make Jordan Belfort look like the guy in a situation where you're like, Jesus Christ, he didn't even do anything. So no, I don't feel bad for Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone's got plenty of money. He'll be fine.
Now, here's the thing. Imagine you made him feel really bad. He was upset, and you basically said you gave your excuse as to why you would not apologize for it. And then he got remorseful, like, wow,
you're right, Tom.
You're right.
I am too.
I was a real piece of shit.
I'm going to sell it and get me a Chevy Bolt.
But like you said, and then he goes on to apologize for all the shit that he said to people who he made fun of. Do you think then he's forgivable?
I mean, just apologizing for something is far from genuine, right? But especially somebody like him who has a lot of money to show for the predatory way he's always kind of carried himself. So I think maybe apologizing in earnest is a great way for somebody like him to start. But there's a lot of literally just kind of putting his money where his mouth is in order for him to really demonstrate a worthiness of redemption in the public's eye. I mean, not that I don't think the public really holds him at any kind of in any sort of contempt, but they ought to. It's the same thing we argue about Jordan Belfort. People ought to regard this guy as a sleazebag, as a piece of shit, as a real failure of humanity to police itself. So I think Grant Cardone's a similar example of that. And yeah, I mean, I think he could redeem himself somehow, but how? He would have to show me because I don't know what he could do to make himself redeemable.
Can I ask you a serious question right now? Do you forgive me for getting you the job at that place that we worked at with together?
Honestly, I never actually had any ill will towards you for that. I mean, maybe I did immediately in the aftermath, but I never. No. So yes, I forgive you. And also, no, I never truly held you accountable for that. I don't think that's something for which I should have held you accountable because I was just as much to blame for what happened there as you were, which is to say, ultimately, we weren't really that much to blame.
I did become a giant piece of shit, though. Do you know when I actually ended up leaving that place, I called some of the people that I worked with and I apologized for my shitty attitude and the person that I became while working there. I hope they all forgive me. I do. But that was a genuine apology that I called. I called everyone and I did apologize to them. I hope they forgive me because I grew as a person. I mean, I became a real piece of shit.
Sure.
I basically mirrored the asshole that we worked for, and I became
definitely
that shitty person. And I did realize it, and I had to call several people, and I had to call them, and I was genuinely sorry because I was a bad person.
I think
I do think people can grow. I mean, I'm an example of, dude, I was the person that was bullied, and then I became a piece of shit, and then I realized that I'm just not supposed to be a piece of shit.
I think we both were a little bit susceptible to the workplace culture, especially because that place had the sort of idea that like work and life were one thing. There was very much not a separation going on there, which is something I will say I have learned to spot in other jobs. And I know now to stay away from jobs like that. I almost took a job like that at one point during the pandemic because, and I know I told you about it, it was an advertising company, and they wanted me to come aboard. They had a lot of things that in common with that place that we worked at that were immediate red flags to me that may not have otherwise been red flags to me if I hadn't had the learning experience of having worked at that place. So I am thankful in the end for that opportunity because it taught me a lot of what I don't want, like what is not desirable in a company culture. So, but also to get back to your point, the company culture there was very, very pervasive in that it was not meant to just be a job. So the fact that it kind of manipulated us, into acting maybe slightly differently than we had prior that we normally would have. I think, us being young and just that being a thing, I don't necessarily, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can't think of anything especially shitty that I did, but I'm sure we all were fucking, I'm sure we did asshole things there. And yeah, I mean, I can at least say, given the context, I've forgiven myself for some of those things, that which I can remember anyway. So, and I think it's important that you do the same.
Now, I guess the next question is we have to ask ourselves, do we forgive the guy we worked for? And that's a very tough question because I don't know if I do, because I don't know if he's ever changed as a person.
It's funny, right? Because somebody like him seemed very reluctant to grow. If anything, he was somebody who resisted growth and looked at that as a measure of consistency. And so I wonder if he's maintained that mindset and he's still just as shitty. I mean, because let's be honest, he had a very similar mindset to the people that we talk shit about now, the Grant Cardones and the Jordan Belforts of the world. So if he's still operating on that mindset, which a lot of people who operate with that mindset tend to not, for whatever reason, they tend to not let go of it, then yeah, no, I don't forgive him for being a piece of shit because what he did was shitty and what he does is shitty.
If he had the opportunity to do it all again and be successful with it this time around, because he wasn't successful when he did it, when he was being shitty.
So do I. So that's why
I think he'd do it all over again.
I would say if that were the case, or at least I'm willing to say that's what I believe, and that may not necessarily be true. So if that were not the case and I were proven wrong, then yes. But I don't think he's worthy of forgiveness now because yeah, I think he's still probably the same shitty person. And I don't, yeah. And I've never seen him exhibit
all over again.
A tendency to change or even a propensity to change for the better.
Yeah. So I guess in some cases, forgiveness is not even doable because how can you
that's
forgive
the same
someone
thing with Elizabeth Holmes, right? It's like
that can't change.
That remorse, that fundamentally, there's got to be some kind of remorse. And granted, sometimes sometimes you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because sometimes if you exhibit that kind of remorse after having gotten caught, people will say, "Oh, look at him crying those crocodile tears. He's not sad that he did it. He's only sad that he got caught or whatever." So I get it that there's really no way to win some situations like that. But and the same thing with Shkreli, no remorse. I mean, everybody remembers the pictures of Shkreli when he was sitting before the Supreme Court and he's just making those stupid fucking faces where he's like looking around the room like he's bored. You have to at least pretend to be sorry for there to even be the beginnings of society forgiving you for having tried to do something very blatantly bad. But if you're not even going to pretend, then why should society pretend that you have, the potential to change and try to forgive you?